Hello, my name is Silas Thorne. I am 30 years old, and my life is defined by the honesty of wood. I'm a carpenter who specializes in custom furniture and cabinetry, working in a small, damped town outside of Portland, Oregon. I'm accustomed to dust, the scent of fresh-cut cedar, and the solitary satisfaction of building things that last. But the lasting quality of my own life was abruptly interrupted by something profoundly trivial: a failing copper pipe. 3 weeks ago, my small apartment became a disaster zone. A burst water main had saturated the ceiling and walls, transforming half my living space into a sodden, uninhabitable mess. The structural engineers and contractors estimated the renovation would take at least 5 weeks of brutal, noisy drying. I am a man of routine, and this displacement shattered my equilibrium. Standing in the ruin of my own home, I felt the unsettling loss of my anchor. My anchor, thankfully, was replaced by the rock-solid certainty of my oldest friend. Leo Vance. Leo and I have a bond forged in the messy, awkward years of adolescence. We navigated high school baseball diamonds, terrible parties, and the confusing pivot into adulthood. While most friendships dissolve under the pressure of distance and differing paths, ours simply deepened, becoming a quiet, essential current beneath our busy lives. Leo, the practical, meticulous accountant, was the counterweight to my creative, sometimes chaotic world of sawdust and blueprints. When I called him, exhausted and soaked in the smell of mildew, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered immediate, decisive action. Don't waste a minute. Pack a bag, grab your essentials, and come stay with us. The guest room is yours. His wife Chloe was equally generous. Chloe, a thoughtful and organized kindergarten teacher, met me at the door with a genuine warmth that immediately eased the tension in my shoulders. She insisted I take the second-floor guest room, dismissing my weak protests about the couch. "You need quiet, Silas," she'd said, touching my arm lightly, "not the smell of Anthony's socks on the living room rug. Take the room. You'll be comfortable." The Vance residence is a classic example of Pacific Northwest architecture, a two-story craftsman built in the 1930s. It's a house with history. Leo inherited it from his grandmother, and he and Chloe have been patiently restoring it, treating the old bones with respect. The floors are original dark oak, the bookshelves are built deep into the walls, and the staircase to the second floor, worn, smooth by decades of feet, spirals up with a subtle, familiar creak. My temporary sanctuary, the guest room, sits directly at the top of that staircase. Being an unexpected resident in someone else's rhythm is a delicate exercise in observation. I quickly learned the house's sonic map, the muffled rumble of the coffee machine starting precisely at 6:45 a.m., the distinctive groan of the ancient hot water heater in the basement when Chloe took her morning shower, the light rhythmic tread of Leo's work boots pacing the hallway before he left for the office. I was living in a cocoon of borrowed domesticity, keenly aware of my status as an interloper, a displaced constant in their established orbit. What I was not prepared for was the immediate, unannounced arrival of a new, equally displaced element. 4 days into my stay, a Tuesday evening, I was coming down the stairs, following the scent of Chloe's famous slow-cooked chicken. Halfway down, I heard an unfamiliar voice, sharp and slightly strained, mixing with Chloe's concerned tones. And there she was, Ilara Quinn, Chloe's older sister, a freelance digital illustrator, 26 years old. She was leaning against the kitchen counter, a worn canvas duffel bag slumped at her feet, her expression a careful, volatile mix of deep resentment and fragile relief. "It's the usual," Chloe explained later, pouring Ilara a glass of wine with an air of practiced calm. "The ongoing conflict with Mom and Dad. They just can't fathom why she won't quit the hobby and get a real job with defined benefits." Ilara had been living near their parents, saving money, trying to prove that her chaotic, creative career could provide stability, but the constant pressure, the subtle judgments masked as concern, had finally pushed her to a breaking point. She needed sanctuary, a place to breathe and recalibrate before making her next move. So, the craftsman house, designed for 2 occupants, now housed what Ilara took the small back room, the former home office, which meant our paths and our silences were now inextricably linked by the single hallway and the shared air of the kitchen. Part 2. The static proximity. The first week was a masterclass in avoidance. Ilara worked from the kitchen table, the best light, she claimed, though I suspected it was also the closest escape route. Her laptop was her fortress, shielded by high-end noise-canceling headphones. I'd come down for my first cup of coffee around 7, already thinking about the client calls and material orders that defined my day. She would be there already, hair pulled back into a hasty, functional knot, enveloped in an oversized heather gray, a sweater that swallowed her small frame, making her look younger, more exposed. Our interactions were minimal, a choreography of polite, surface-level exchanges that acknowledged our presence without demanding any actual connection. "Morning," I'd offer, trying to keep my voice low enough not to pierce her concentration, but loud enough to be heard over the distant hum of her music. "Morning, Silas," she'd reply, a nod barely shifting her gaze from the glow of her screen. "Excuse me," she might say, if she needed to slip past me to reach the refrigerator. "Thank you," she'd murmur, if I happened to top off her mug when I poured my second cup. She was focused, relentlessly driven, her fingers a blur over the trackpad. I occasionally caught glimpses of the work that consumed her, intricate logo designs for boutique bakeries, bright, deceptively simple website layouts, and complex, layered illustrations that looked like they belonged in a very expensive children's book. Her craft, like mine, required a precise translation of abstract ideas into tangible form, yet her world felt ethereal and fleeting, while mine was anchored in the stubborn reality of oak and steel. I spent most of my days in Leo's garage, which he'd generously cleared out for me. I was building a complex, custom liquor cabinet for a long-standing client, and the smell of dark walnut stain and sawdust became my personal atmosphere. It was productive, but it lacked the deep, grounding rhythm of my own shop. I was still a guest, even in my work. In the evenings I'd return, tired and smelling of wood oils. Alara would usually retreat to her room after dinner, citing early morning client meetings in different time zones, but the house, that old observant house, was beginning to shift its energy. We were two creative people, fundamentally lonely in our pursuit of craft, orbiting the steady, conventional center provided by Leo and Chloe. The proximity, even with the careful barriers, was starting to wear down the insulation. I realized I was starting to look for her, not consciously, not with intent, but with a subtle, unacknowledged expectation. Was the kitchen table empty? Had she already gone to bed? The second week our silent routine was broken by exhaustion. I had been wrestling with a particularly frustrating Yeshua complex compound miter cut for a curved corner piece that seemed resistant to all logical geometry. I came down at 11:30 p.m. for a glass of ice water, my mind still humming with the problem. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the faint glow filtering in from the streetlights through the lace curtains, and there she was. Alara was sitting at the table, just as I'd found her in the early morning, but now she was utterly still. Her laptop was closed, her headphones abandoned beside it. She wasn't working. She was staring out the window into the deep inky black of the backyard. The only illumination was the soft blue ambient light from a screensaver still active on her closed laptop, casting an indigo sheen across the planes of her cheekbones. She looked vulnerable, stripped of her professional armor, her face drawn, her posture slumped with a heavy weariness that was intensely personal. I almost retreated, convinced that interrupting this moment would be a violation. But the sight of her, so utterly exposed and lost, held me fast. I walked quietly to the counter, filled my glass, and let the small mechanical clink of the ice cubes be my introduction. She startled slightly, turning her head toward the sound. For a long-held breath second, I thought she might cry. Her eyes were wide and slightly glossy. Then, slowly, painfully, a genuine smile surfaced, not the polite one, but a small, sad curve of her lips that tightened something essential in my chest. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice low, respectful of the sleeping couple upstairs. "Just thinking," she whispered back. "Too much thinking. Probably. The kind of cyclical, destructive thinking that gets you nowhere." I took a deliberate, measured gulp of water. The decision to stay was made in the space between heartbeats. I walked to the table and pulled out the chair directly across from her. We sat there, separated by the width of the old oak table, connected only by the blue light and the profound silence. For 10 minutes, maybe more, we watched the backyard, where Leo had half finished building a deck before the persistent autumn rain had forced a construction moratorium. The silence was not awkward, it was comfortable, a heavy velvet cloak of shared presence. "I love the quiet," she said, eventually, her voice barely a thread. "All day, my clients' demands are screaming in my ear. The phone buzzes, the internet flashes. But now, it's just peace. It's the only time my brain stops fighting itself." I understood completely. The silence felt like a reward after a day spent battling resistance, whether from rigid metal or unyielding clients. It felt like a deep, cleansing breath. Part 3. The shared quiet that night was the initiation of our routine. Not every night, but often enough 2 or 3 times a week I would wait for the house to settle, for the last sounds of Leo and Chloe upstairs to fade, before I would venture downstairs for my glass of water. Sometimes I found Alara reading a heavy ink-stained book on art history. Sometimes she was meticulously sketching in a massive leather-bound notebook, not professional work, but quick, visceral personal studies. Other times, like that first night, she was just sitting there, gazing into the dark, thinking. The subjects of our conversations evolved slowly, organically moving from surface pleasantries to the foundational elements of our lives. We started with the nature of craftsmanship versus art. "You're lucky, Silas," she said one evening, stirring a cup of herbal tea. "Carpentry is utility. It's tangible. When you build a cabinet, its purpose is inherent. It holds things. It exists in the real world. My work, even the graphic design, feels disposable. I considered this, but the craft is the same. Ilara, we both take raw material, whether it's raw lumber or a raw concept, and we shape it, refine it, until the form serves the function. You take ideas and make them real. That take wood and make it useful and beautiful. You're solving problems through creativity, just in a different medium." She traced the rim of her mug with a fingertip. But the stakes are different. If your cabinet fails, something falls. If my art fails, a piece of my soul feels cheapened. I told her about the worst day I'd ever had on a job site, a kitchen renovation where the client had shifted the design 3 times. The previous contractor had botched the infrastructure, and I had pulled 3 consecutive 16-hour days just to meet a deadline. I had barely broken even financially. "Why didn't you just walk away?" she asked, her eyes wide with genuine curiosity. "Because I gave my word," I said, leaning back in my chair. "And because even when a project goes completely sideways, there's a primal satisfaction in seeing it through, in knowing that I didn't quit when it became difficult. That act of finishing validates the skill, regardless of the profit." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand. I take on those impossible client projects, too. The ones with the unrealistic budget and the contradictory demands. It's like proving to myself that I can solve the unsolvable problem." "Is that what you're doing with your parents now? Proving something?" The air tightened. It was the first time I'd directly applied our philosophical talk to her current emotional crisis. She was silent for a long time, the only sound the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the distant hallway. "Maybe," she admitted, her voice lower than before. "Or maybe I'm just scared that if I stop trying to prove I'm a viable professional, I'll disappoint them even more than I already have." I resisted the urge to offer platitudes about parental love. I sensed she needed space, not solutions. My role, I realized, was not to fix the broken pieces, but simply to listen while she surveyed the damage. "What would you do?" I asked instead, choosing my words carefully. "If you knew, absolutely, that you could not fail." She looked up at me, surprised, her eyes reflecting the blue light of the window. "I'd paint," she said, without hesitation. "Real art, not logos or packaging models. Paintings that don't have to serve any purpose except existing. Art that just is." "Why don't you do that now?" "Because it's not practical." She sighed, the weight of her parents' expectations momentarily crushing the dreamer. "Because I need the insurance. Because my parents are right, it's not a stable career choice." "But are you happy doing the practical thing?" The answer came out on an exhausted breath. "No, I'm not." That conversation became the new foundation of our shared quiet. It was the core truth that connected us, the struggle to align who we were with what the world demanded. We both lived in that lonely, internal space. Philosophical depth and shared vulnerability. Our late-night talks expanded over the next few weeks, delving into the nature of fear, stability, and authenticity. One night, the topic was fear. "My deepest professional fear," I confessed, "isn't failure. It's mediocrity. It's building something that's adequate, but doesn't have that spark of rightness, that perfect joinery, that seamless fit. If I build a chair, I want it to be the best chair a person has ever sat in. If I build a house, I want the inhabitants to feel grounded, protected, secure. The fear is losing the edge of excellence." Elara's fear was different. "Mine is visibility," she said, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Putting my true self on the canvas and having the world judge it as worthless. The commercial work, the logos, the websites, that's a mask. It's anonymous. If a client hates a website layout, they hate the design. They don't hate me. But if I paint a scene that captures the deepest, most complex emotion I'm feeling, and someone dismisses it as childish or trite, that cuts into the bone. Then you've found the truth," I countered. "The thing worth fighting for. That vulnerability is the cost of real art." We talked about stability. I told her about the initial lure of college, the pressure to wear a suit, and the relief I felt when I finally picked up my father's old saw and realized my hands knew the answers my mind couldn't provide. "My parents saw a path that looked safe," I said. "But for me, that path was a cliff." True stability isn't the guaranteed paycheck. It's knowing, fundamentally, that you are capable of providing for yourself using your innate gifts. "I trust my hands. I don't trust the market," Elara admitted. "I trust my hand, too. I can draw anything, but relying on the world to value my vision, that's terrifying. My parents just want the security to pay the mortgage. They think I'm throwing away the safety net." "But what is safety?" I pressed. "If it requires you to sacrifice your self-worth every day." She was quiet for a long time. Then, she looked at me with new depth. "I've been thinking about that, about what happiness looks like, not as an abstract concept, but as a visual, sensory experience." "Tell me," I invited. She closed her eyes, visualizing. "It's warm colors, oranges, deep reds, soft yellows, not sharp light, but the kind that filters through ancient trees at dusk. The edges of everything are slightly blurred, soft, and there's always movement, the kinetic energy of water flowing over mossy stones, or wind pushing clouds across a vast sky. It looks like something you can feel, not something you can pin down." "And mine," I said, after considering her description. "Mine looks like the clean, honest joinery of a perfect drawer. It smells like dark cherry wood and feels like the weight of a finished project resting perfectly on the floor. It looks like leaving something behind that matters, that will stand long after I'm gone." Our conversations, lengthy and intensely personal, were building a silent structure between us, far stronger than the temporary walls of the guest room. I was falling for her, not just for her aesthetic beauty, which was considerable, but for the intricate, fragile architecture of her mind, her creativity, her fear, her courage. All of it resonated with the deepest parts of my own solitary journey. I realized I was listening not just as a friend, but as a person profoundly attracted to the truth of another part. For the reckoning and the choice of the days continued their relentless march. My renovation was entering its final tedious phase. Ilara's time at the Vance house was quickly running out. The air in the house became charged with the unspoken reality of her impending departure. She found me one afternoon in the garage. I was applying the final oil finish to the walnut liquor cabinet, a meditative, the slow process that highlights the grain and locks the beauty of the wood forever. "It's about the job offer," she said, not meeting my eyes. "The Seattle firm, they've given me a final deadline." My heart sank, but I kept my hand steady, running the oil-soaked rag in slow, deliberate circles. "What are you leaning toward?" She sat down on a workbench stool, running her finger over the smooth, unfinished surface of a leftover piece of maple. "It's everything I should want. The title, the security, the benefits. It's the responsible choice. It solves all the parental arguments instantly. And the art becomes a weekend hobby," she said, her voice hollow. "It becomes a luxury I do when I'm not exhausted from meeting their professional deadlines. It becomes a compromise." She looked up, her expression a mix of pleading and genuine internal conflict. "I feel like I'm betraying the person you and I have been talking about for weeks, the person who wants to paint her soul onto the canvas." I stopped working, finally, and looked at her, sawdust clinging to my eyelashes. "You're right. You would be betraying her, but only you can live with that consequence." I explained my own near miss with responsibility. I had nearly taken a supervisory role at a large construction firm a few years ago, a steady paycheck, a pension plan. It was the safe choice. I remembered the heavy physical sickness I felt when I prepared to sign the papers. The certainty of comfort had felt like the certainty of death. I'd walked away, taking a huge financial gamble, but securing my freedom. "The money is just a means, Ilara," I said, cleaning the oil from my hands. "It's not the definition of your life. If you take that job, you buy a form of security you don't need, but you pay for it with the most valuable commodity you possess, the unique lens through which you see the world." We talked for hours, meticulously dissecting the pros and cons, but the weight of the should was immense. The next day was agonizing. She was on the phone with the hiring manager, taking notes, asking questions about the relocation package. I tried to focus on measuring deck railings for Leo's unfinished project, but my mind was an echo chamber of fear. The thought of the house emptying, of the long silence after she left, felt unbearable. I realized with a sudden, devastating clarity that I was profoundly, terrifyingly, in love with the complex, artistic soul who sat silently in the kitchen every night. I found her that evening in the back of the garage, where I had been working with excessive force, trying to work off my nervous energy by wrestling with large slabs of cedar. "I turned it down," she said, stepping over a pile of wood scraps. I stopped sanding, the sharp, grinding noise abruptly ceasing. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with realization. "Really, you did it." "I called them this afternoon," she confirmed, a mix of relief and stark terror in her voice. I said thank you, but no. I felt terrified, Silas, but also ... free, like I jumped off a cliff. And I still don't know if I'm going to fly or crash. I put down the sandpaper and walked toward her, the space between us closing slowly. "You are going to fly," I said, my voice absolutely certain. "I know it. I can't stay here much longer," she continued, pushing forward, practicalities replacing the emotional high. "Leo and Chloe have been angels, but I need my own space, a studio. I found a small apartment, affordable enough to start the gamble. I'm taking the leap. I'm going to paint." "That's incredible, Ella." She reached out, her hand hovering near mine but not touching. "There's something else. I don't want to leave here and lose what we've found. These conversations, knowing you, it's the best part of being displaced." My heart hammered against my ribs, a solid, predictable rhythm I hadn't felt since our first kiss was an abstract possibility. "It's been the best part for me, too," I admitted. "So," she said, taking the final, decisive step toward me, her eyes locked on mine, "when I move into the studio, maybe you could visit, help me hang the canvases, share a bottle of wine, see what happens when we don't have to worry about the rhythm of this house." I reached for her hands then, unable to resist the pull. Her skin was cool, soft, but her grip was firm. "I'd love that," I said, the words inadequate for the magnitude of my desire. She smiled, not the sad smile, not the polite mask, but the genuine warm, radiant smile that only came when she was speaking her truth. When she leaned toward me, I didn't hesitate. Our first kiss, there in the garage smelling of sawdust and finished walnut, was soft and tentative, tasting like possibility and a profoundly hopeful future. Part V. The Ascent and the Unvillangelera signed the lease on Friday. The apartment was on the second floor of a beautifully aged Victorian, converted into small, affordable living spaces. It had a private entrance, a tiny balcony overlooking an overgrown garden, and Crucially, massive windows that flooded the space with natural light, a perfect studio. The weekend was dedicated to the move. Leo, Chloe, and I formed a small, efficient crew. Ilara didn't have much furniture, mostly books, clothes, and an overwhelming volume of art supplies. It was strange, watching Ilara set up her life, when she carefully positioned her new easel by the largest window, and when she started hanging her private canvases, the landscapes, the abstract meditations on light and movement. The room transformed. This was the first time I saw her work displayed properly. Outside the secrecy of her sketchbook, the paintings were stunning. They weren't just technically skilled, they were emotionally resonant. They captured not just a forest, but the feeling of being utterly alone and grounded within it. They were visual poems, just as I had described. "These are incredible, Ilara," I murmured, standing before a piece that looked like an ocean floor filtered through a childhood memory. "You really think so?" she asked, adjusting the wire on another, her cheeks flushed with the pride she was still trying to mask. "I really think so. You should be showing these in galleries, not just in your studio." Leo and Chloe bustled around us, arguing happily about the best organizational methods for the kitchen utensils. Their familiar domesticity was a comforting backdrop to the quiet revolution happening between us. I watched Ilara step back, assessing her arrangement, and felt a profound sense of rightness. This small, sunlit, uncertain space was where she belonged. That evening, after Leo and Chloe had left, Ilara and I sat on the small thrift store couch she had managed to acquire. We ate takeout, the air thick with anticipation. "I should probably head back," I said, though the words felt like a lie. I had my own place now, dried out and renovated, waiting for me. But this space, full of her art and the scent of new possibilities, felt more like home. She leaned into me, closing the small, lingering distance between us. "Or, you could stay a little longer, Silas. We finally have privacy." There was a vulnerability in her voice that was impossible to ignore. "I know we said we'd take things slow," she interrupted, catching my eye. "And we will. But I've been thinking about you every night for weeks, and now we don't have to whisper." I reached for her, pulling her close, inhaling the scent of her hair, which still smelled faintly of the expensive, floral shampoo I'd come to associate with our late-night talks. "I've been thinking about you, too, Ilara, more than I should have been." "Then maybe," she whispered, tilting her face up to mine, "we don't have to take things quite as slow as we thought." Our kiss was no longer tentative. It was a hungry, passionate confirmation. There was no holding back, no fear of the creaky floorboards or the watchful eyes of family. There was only the heat of certainty, the validation of weeks of quiet emotional building. We made love that night on the new couch, the city lights streaming through the uncurtained windows, her paintings watching over us like benevolent, silent witnesses. It was a joining that felt inevitable, gentle, passionate, and overwhelmingly right. It was the physical manifestation of the mental connection we had meticulously crafted over the past month. Afterward, lying tangled under a thin blanket, we talked about the immediate future. "What about us?" she asked, her head resting on my chest. "Are you scared about this kind of complicated?" "I thought about it," I admitted, running my fingers through her hair. "But it's the good kind of scared. The kind that means something truly matters, something worth the risk." "I know what you mean," she said, kissing my shoulder. "It means we found the difference between what we want and what we should want. And we chose want." Over the next few weeks, our relationship solidified into a routine that felt perfectly balanced between domesticity and creative fire. I would finish work and head straight to her apartment. We'd cook dinner, her messy, intuitive cooking, contrasting with my precise, measured technique, and talk for hours. She'd show me the evolution of her new paintings, and I'd describe the challenges of my current woodworking projects. She started approaching local businesses. The owner of the small, high-end coffee shop near her apartment agreed to display a few of her paintings. I was there the day she sold her first piece. We were sharing a pastry in a silent moment of early morning coffee when a well-dressed woman approached our table. "The landscape near the window, did you paint that?" "I did," Ilara managed, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. "It's breathtaking," the woman said. "It's not just a view, it's a mood. I must have it. Would you consider selling it?" Ilara glanced at me, her eyes wide. I simply nodded, the victory swelling in my chest. She named a price too low, I thought, but respectable. The woman agreed instantly. After the transaction was finalized, Ilara stared at the check, her hand trembling slightly. "I can't believe it, Silas. Someone actually paid for my vision. Not a website, but something that just ... is." "The first of many," I confirmed, squeezing her hand across the table. The sale ignited her confidence. She contacted other local businesses. Within a month, she had pieces hanging in 3 locations across town, and inquiries began to trickle in for commissioned work, not design, but art. My own apartment remained empty. I found myself spending nearly every night at Ilara's. It felt like home in a way my own renovated walls never could. Part 6. The quiet mending. Made permanent as winter thawed into a tentative spring, our relationship deepened and expanded. Our quiet mending, initially focused on Ilara's internal conflicts, began to affect the world around us. The biggest hurdle, meeting her parents. I was intensely nervous. Her father, a retired mechanical engineer, and her mother, a former school administrator, represented the very forces of stability and predictability Alara had fought so hard to reject. They arrived in January. The initial meeting was strained. "This is Silas," Alara announced, her hand laced firmly in mine. "He's a carpenter. He builds beautiful, strong things." Her father, Mr. Quinn, shook my hand firmly, his gaze assessing, analytical. But when he started asking about my work, the precision required for complex joinery, the problem-solving inherent in custom installations, we found a common ground.